Hi, I'm John O'Rourke, true crime author, retired New Jersey State Trooper, and private detective. You know, there are cases that stick with you, cases that gnaw at you because of how wrong they are. Not because just in the outcome, but in the way that every single step leading up to that outcome shows a breakdown in what policing is supposed to be about. And the case of Tamir Rice is one of those. For those who may not remember, Tamir was a 12-year-old boy in Cleveland, Ohio, playing in a park on November 22nd, 2014. He was just a kid doing what kids do, playing. He had a pellet gun, something that looked like a real firearm, and he was waving around, playing maybe cops and robbers. Someone called 911, and that call set off a chain of events and a tragedy that should never have happened. Now, I want to take this step by step, not just because it matters in terms of the timeline, but because every moment in this story is a lesson in what not to do. As a former cop, I can tell you this wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just one officer having a bad day. This was a collision of poor training, bad judgment, poor communication. Maybe most important of all, there was a complete absence of compassion and courage that real policing demands. Let's start with the call. A man phoned 911 and said that there's someone in a park with a gun. Said he was pointing it at people. But then crucially, he said, and this is actually on the tape, that the person is probably a juvenile and a gun is probably safe or a toy. He didn't say it once, he said it twice. Those words were relayed through dispatch incorrectly to the officers. And when they rolled up on the scene, they didn't know what the caller had said. They didn't know that the weapon might not be real. They didn't know that this was a kid. Right there, before anyone even arrived, we have the first breakdown. Communications. Dispatch. It was a failure to get accurate information to the responding officers. But then comes the next part, how the officers responded. Officer Timothy Lohman and his partner, Officer Frank Gombach, arrived at the park. Instead of stopping at a distance, instead of taking a tactical approach, instead of assessing the scene with time and distance, which was on their side, they pulled their cruiser right up to within feet of Tamir. They rushed the situation. They gave themselves no room, no cover, no time to assess. This is policing 101. You don't put yourself in a corner like that. You don't take away your own options. And yet, that's exactly what they did. And then, within 2 seconds, believe it or not, 2 seconds of arriving on the scene, Officer Lohman fired the fatal shot. No warning, no freeze, no drop the gun, no chance for Tamir to process what was happening, no way to verify if the threat was even real. And here is the most damaging. The 911 caller said that the subject was probably a juvenile and a gun was probably fake. But that critical information, as I said, never was communicated to the officers. They went in blind stripped of the very details that should have slowed them down, that should have made them take a breath, reassess. Yes, a 12-year-old can be armed and dangerous, especially when he's 5'7" and weighing around 195. He did look much older. Also, this neighborhood was a crime-ridden neighborhood, but Tamir wasn't a threat. He was a kid with no record, no history, no reason to really be seen as a target. What killed him wasn't just a bullet. It was bad communication, rushed judgment, and the failure to recognize humanity before pulling the trigger. And let's not forget, this officer wasn't even supposed to be there. Timothy Lohman had a history. He had been forced out of another police department, believe it or not, the Independence Police Department, because he was deemed unfit for duty. You can't make this up. His supervisor said he lacked the emotional maturity and stability to handle the job. He had resigned before they could fire him. That should have been a red flag. How did Cleveland Police Department hire this officer? Obviously, they didn't do their homework or didn't care. And as a result, a 12-year-old paid with his life. And this raises a much bigger problem in policing. The way police officers are moved around from one department to another without really getting full scrutiny. Just because you're making a lateral move from one police department to another, maybe for a higher paying police department, you need to do a background check. Why did they leave? Was it performance? Was it disciplinary? Was it because their judgment, their temperament, or their decision making under pressure can put others at risk? If another agency has decided that an officer can't handle the responsibility of carrying a badge and gun, ignoring that fact or conducting an improper investigation isn't just negligence. It really is criminal. Background checks are a safeguard. It's a barrier that protects the public as from officers that are proven by other departments to be unfit. Recycling them back into the system from one department to the other is just an ingredient for disaster. So now you have multiple failures: dispatch, tactical approach, hiring and vetting of officers. And then the biggest failure of them all is compassion, courage. The kind of courage it takes not to pull the trigger that's making you feel uneasy, but to pause, to assess, to communicate, to protect life. Taking a tactical approach would have allowed for that. Tactical training allows for officers to slow things down. Police officers are taught to use time, distance, and cover. They're taught to control a scene. They control the scene by creating space, not by rushing in blind and pulling up within feet. That is just asinine and poor police tactics. Actually boxing yourself into a corner. You're supposed to stop short, scan, observe, issue clear commands from a safe distance with constructive force, authority, over the PA system if you have to. That's basic patrol tactics 101. After I graduated the New Jersey State Police Academy, my trooper coach gave me a homework assignment. I remember when he said that, a homework assignment. It was to read the book Police Survival, which went into detail about tactical approaches, from motor vehicle stops to approaching subjects to entering buildings. It was a lesson well learned and served me well over my 26-year career with the state police. 4, if I didn't act tactically on many of my investigations, it could have ended with deadly consequences. And when it's a juvenile, when a person in front of you looks like a kid, everything changes. Training should kick in harder. You should assume immaturity. Shouldn't assume confusion. You should assume that they might not process commands like an adult would. That's what patience is all about. It's not just a suggestion, it's a lifeline. Slow the tempo down. Call backup. Take cover. These are the moves that can both save the officers' lives and the child's life. Here's the truth many don't see. Lack of education makes a dangerous gap. Without understanding drama, human development, or social behavior, officers can misread fear as defiance, hesitation as resistance. That split second of misjudgment can escalate a situation faster than you could react. Training is supposed to be deliberate and give officers insight, control over situations. And if the foundation isn't there with training, then a person's instincts take over. And instincts on temper can be deadly, especially with an unhinged police officer. Policing can be life and death. Every second matters. Every decision matters. And when the person that's in front of you is a child, and when they can't really articulate what's happening inside them, that gap between knowledge and assumption can cost a life. Education, patience, and awareness, these are soft skills. They are survival skills. They are the difference between tragedy and walking away with everyone alive. Unfortunately, none of that happened here. No distance, no commands, no patience, just an immediate resort to deadly force. And that tells you a lot, not only about the police officer's mindset, but about the failure of the Cleveland Police Department to drill basic principles into the officers. Policing isn't about shooting first and then figuring out later. It's about protecting the innocent. It's about making sure you don't take a life unless you have to. In this case, there were options. He could have stopped. There was plenty of tactical distance that he could have taken advantage of. He could have called for backup. He could have taken cover. He just they just failed at every step of the way that you can think about from a tactical approach. They did none of that. And where was the partner? His partner was behind the wheel. He's the one who put them in that fatal position. And when the shot rang out, where was his intervention? Where was his voice? Where was his responsibility to say, slow down? Think. Don't rush. You need to protect life, your life, and then the life of the child. Policing is a team effort. And in this case, the second officer, he's just as responsible for what happened. Intervention is part of the job. You don't just stand by and watch your partner make a mistake that can cost a young kid his life. You step in, you take action. That didn't happen here. And history shows us why that matters. Years later, The world watched in horror as George Floyd cried out for his life, saying he couldn't breathe, pinned under a knee, while officers nearby didn't do a thing about it. They didn't yell. They didn't step in to intervene. They didn't challenge the partner. They just stood there. How? How can people have inaction like that? And that inaction turned out to be deadly, just like Tamar's inaction by the police partner there. Policing carries a sacred responsibility to protect life, to act when others fail, and to try to stop mistakes before they become tragedy. When officers abandon that responsibility, whether out of fear, loyalty, or apathy, the consequences are irreversible. Silence isn't safety. Silence isn't loyalty. And silence is complicity. In policing, complicity can cost someone their life, as we see time and time again. Every officer on the scene, every officer in the car, every backup unit, they have a duty. It doesn't stop at just watching and covering. It's stepping up if you need to. It's intervening if necessary. And it's saying, this is not how we do it. This is not how it's supposed to be done. And we protect life first. And every time police fail to hold themselves accountable, and every time cops stand by, history reminds us lives are on the line. And when that line is crossed, there's no second chance. When we break down the lessons from this case, there are so many training issues, tactics to go over, hiring issues, but most of all, having the courage to do the right thing matters. That's the lesson that needs to come away from this. Too many cops think that courage is running towards danger, about rushing in, showing fearlessness under fire or under threat. But real courage is more complicated than that. Real courage is restraint. Real courage is knowing when not to shoot. Real courage is recognizing that the person in front of you is a child. And courage is what most officers lack, not because they're bad people, but because of fear. Fear of speaking up when a partner is making a mistake. Fear of having a difference of appearing, a difference of appearing, a difference of opinion from your peers, a difference of opinion with your supervisor. And that timidity can cost lives. And too often, officers remain silent, watching things unfold. They're worried more about loyalty or avoiding conflict, about doing what is right. And then you add laziness into the mix. Officers who have no idea what they're doing on a job aren't competent and well versed in what they can and cannot do. They create a dangerous environment. And then you combine that with a lack of tactical awareness, rushing into situations without a strategy, without assessing risk, and the result is chaos. Every misstep compounds the next. Courage in policing isn't just action. It's knowledge. It's preparation. It's awareness. It's restraint. And most of all, it's stepping in to correct mistakes, even when it's uncomfortable, even when your partner might push back, even when it might cost you personally. It's having the backbone to follow training, follow procedure, and follow your conscience. Do what's right. Don't just follow the path of least resistance. And when officers lack that courage, when fear and laziness take over, Unfortunately, the most vulnerable pay the price. And the aftermath? Well, it only adds insult to injury. The police falsified the report. They said that Tamir was reaching for the gun, but surveillance footage from a nearby building showed otherwise.
And I started screaming verbal commands. Put your hands in the air, put your hands in the air, let me see your hands, freeze, put your hands in the air. I said numerous times out loud, and I presented my gun, through the window, so,
Is your window down?
It was closed, I believe, not 100%. I believe it was closed.
In the video we've shown you so many times, based on what Timothy Lohman said, he yelled again and again and again from about 20 or 30 yards away. Somehow he claims he was able to give commands several times with the windows up. But the video shows something different. In less than 2 seconds of opening the door, Lohman fires. He says twice.
It was that quick where the black male turned, lifted up his shirt, grabbed, reached in his waistband, pulled up the weapon. And that's, at that time I was probably about like this. And that's when I had to fire 2 shots.
Lohman says Rice was reaching for a gun in his waistband.
He did not punch out or present it, because when he got about this far, that's when I shot.
Why?
Because I believe there was a threat to myself and my partner, and it was, in order to kill us or harm us.
After Rice is on the ground, bleeding to death, his sister comes over.
A black female came out running, screaming, saying, "You shot my brother, you shot my brother."
As Rice is dying, his sister is handcuffed and put in the back of the squad car.
These cops tried to justify the unjustifiable. They tried to twist the facts to fit their narrative instead of to let the facts guide the story. That's not just a failure. That is a failure of culture, police culture. Because here's the truth. If officers aren't honest about their mistakes, if they don't hold themselves accountable, then nothing changes. And when nothing changes, tragedy repeats itself time and time again. Decades later, we saw it with George Floyd. Officers across the country watched a man's life being taken in broad daylight and did nothing. They failed to act. They failed to intervene. And of course, they failed to challenge their partners. Did they learn from the Tamir Rice case? Did they apply these lessons? Of course not. Of course not. The same fear, the same loyalty that police culture, the same loyalty to others than the truth and the law, that's the cost of a bad police culture. It's not abstract, unfortunately. We're talking about children. We're talking about families. We're talking about entire communities. And its lives stolen because too many in the system prioritize protecting each other over protecting the public. Honesty and accountability, courage, those aren't just ideas. They are life-saving imperatives. When officers ignore these, the consequences, as I said, are permanent, as illustrated by this case. And the blame is shared by every single person who stood by and did nothing. The story of Tamir Rice should be an example for every police academy to study it, to look at it, and look at all the failures that were there. And maybe, just maybe, in the future, we can have a different outcome. Maybe we could have a better tactical police response. There are many things that were preventable here. Communication, training, tactical approach, education, learning how to assess risk. I'll say this as plainly as I can. That 12-year-old boy, should be alive today. And the fact that he isn't, that's on those officers. But it's also on the system that allowed that officer to be there with a gun and a badge. A man who was unprepared for the responsibility that comes with carrying that weight. And I want you to hear this, that being a police officer is about more than just your safety. It's about the safety of the people you swore to protect. It's about standing up for right and wrong. It's about having the moral backbone to say no, to stop, to pause, and intervene if you have to, even when it's uncomfortable. Whether you've been on the job for 2 weeks, 2 years, or 22 years, you have that responsibility, because every bad cop action out there, every shortcut, every rush to judgment, every failure to intervene, it doesn't just hurt the victim. It hurts the whole profession of policing. It destroys the public trust in policing. It makes it harder for good cops to do their jobs. Tamir, his case is a haunting reminder of the fact that this job has no room for cowardice that's disguised as courage. Shooting a child in 2 seconds isn't courage. It's failure. And it's the worst kind of failure.